Hi there. Today we're going to be having a look at data validation. And as the quote on the screen suggests, we have a problem. And the problem is users. So when we're designing Java applications, we need to make every effort to ensure that our programs are idiot-proof. Take this screen that's showing at the moment. There are several problems with it, not least of which there's no validation. We can fill in values. And here are some of the problems. The name field got left empty. There are too many digits in the cell phone number. The user put in a web address and not an email. The date doesn't exist. The month doesn't exist. There's no 30th of February, and it's in the future. The grade is too big. There's no school. And what is not a good answer when you are asked for a yes or no. So how do we take care of these problems? Here are some of the ways. We can use a check to see whether a value has been filled in. I can check for the length of the telephone number. We can check to see whether the email address contains valid characters, the letters of the alphabet, dots, commas, and an @ symbol. We can see whether the grade is only those valid numbers that are allowed. And we can use a date control to make sure that only a valid date is entered. And a checkbox so that someone can indicate whether they want to subscribe or not, and no other option is possible. There's several different types of validation, quite apart from those that are covered using the GUI controls that we have. We also have things like format checks to check whether something is the right format, data type checks to see whether the right data type is entered, range checks to see whether things are within a valid range, length, which we've referred to already, presence check to make sure that something has been entered, logic checks. There are also things like check digits. If you type in a ISBN number or a credit card or your ID number, the very last digit is a check digit. And there's a little calculation, it's not a complicated calculation, but there's a little calculation that gets run and compared to that last character to see whether it is likely that 2 digits have been transposed or the wrong digit has been added. It's not a guarantee that it will be correct, but it does safeguard one to a degree. And of course, the last one is we can have a lookup table where only certain values are permitted. In the previous screen, if the school control was still showing, there would have been options for several different schools, and you could select one. Which brings us to your data validation task. The validation task is an alternative to a test, and we'll be using that as part of your term order for the term. You're going to be required to make a small program. It's going to have several different input types, and it's going to have to allow at least 4 different types of data. It's going to have to allow someone to type in a number, do something that involves a true or false answer, type in a string, and choose a date. You need to select the most appropriate GUI component to eliminate incorrect input and provide the first level of data validation. Sometimes you will also have to add additional validation using programming code. If you take the date time, for example, the control will ensure that a valid date is entered, but your program may have to check to make sure that the date is not in the future. You'll also have to provide some feedback. Your program doesn't have to be functional in any real sense, but what it does have to do is provide feedback as to whether the inputs are correct. So you need to indicate an error message for each and every error. Those are those 4 errors, the 4 different types of input that we are referring to. You're going to have to indicate the incorrect values by highlighting the fields component and describing the error in an adjacent label. So you will need a label next to the component specifically for describing the error. Lastly, if all the fields are acceptable, in other words, there are no errors, then you need to display an appropriate message in another label. Obviously, some fields may not require further validation. A spinner component is set up with a built-in top and bottom range, and it only allows a particular type of number, so there is no further validation required. Likewise, a checkbox can only be true or false, and no other option is possible. The date picker will also not require validation if future dates are acceptable. But if you need to limit things to a particular range, then we're back to needing a range check. So what do you have to provide? Well, you're going to have to provide a little document. The document will need a title page where obviously you will need to put in your name and what this task is. This should include a table of contents. Word has a very nice table of contents feature built in, and I'll be happy to help you with it if you have problems. You will need a rough interface design. This can be screenshots from Scene Builder with some arrows drawn in, or you can use one of the design tools like draw.io. Inside this document, you'll need a table that gives the name of each field, the data type of the field, which GUI component you have chosen for the input, along with the reason why you chose that GUI component, the type of validation that will be performed. So for someone typing in a name, we can't specify what sort of name you're going to type in, but you would need to check that that name exists, that there is input in that field. For something which involves numbers, you might have to check to make sure that this is the correct data type if you're using a text field for it, and you'll also have to check that it fits inside a valid range. Lastly, you must give the reason that for your choice of validation for that particular type. So there'll be several items in this. I'd recommend laying out your pages in landscape with several columns. You will need a test plan, which indicates how you're going to test to make sure that your validation actually works. Before you actually start trying out input, you should plan out what data you're going to be testing with. That way you'll know what your target is. Lastly, you need the evidence, which means as you are running your program, you would have to take screenshots and include these in the document. Obviously also, you need a copy of all the programming code. And that's it. So this is not a difficult task, and it can be done fairly quickly. But like with all these things, the devil is in the details. So please do be thorough. Okay, bye for now.